Being human means being alone in ways no one else will ever truly see. You can be surrounded by family, by friends, even by crowds who cheer your name, and yet inside your mind sits a silence that belongs only to you. There are feelings you will never share, thoughts you would never dare to say aloud, and memories too heavy to pass to another soul. This loneliness is not a weakness. It is the condition of consciousness itself. To be conscious is to stand at the edge of existence, staring out from your singular vantage point, knowing that no one else can ever stand exactly where you stand. That realization carries both pain and possibility. Pain, because it means suffering often feels unseen, even when we cry out. Possibility, because it means each of us holds a perspective on existence no one else in history or the future will ever replicate. That makes even the most broken life carry a value beyond measure. The Absolute is not a God in the way religions dress it, not a being who whispers rules or hands out punishments. The Absolute is the root of everything, the final connection, the field of consciousness and possibility that holds every moment of reality within it. It does not erase loneliness, but it does mean this: when you feel alone, you are never fully cut off. Your awareness, even when wounded, is part of the Absolute. The very fact that you feel pain proves that you are bound into existence. It proves that you matter. Yet suffering is cruel because it convinces you otherwise. It tells you that you do not matter. It tells you that your life is a burden, that no one cares, that the world would move on without you as if you were never here. Suffering is persuasive because it is real, because some suffering never is seen by others, never is validated, never is softened. Some suffering exists in secret, buried under daily routines, hidden beneath polite words. And some of it is raw, obvious, unrelenting, but ignored by those who should have cared. This is where despair grows, not only from pain itself, but from the absence of being recognized in that pain. To live with this despair is to live with a question: why continue? Why endure what feels unendurable? And here is where perspective matters, not a shallow positivity, not false promises that it will all be okay, but a recognition that suffering itself is part of the fabric of being human. If life is awareness, then pain is its proof. A creature without the ability to suffer is not truly alive in the same way we are. Suffering is not a lesson from some cosmic teacher, nor a punishment for mistakes. It is the shadow side of consciousness, unavoidable, universal, and inescapably real. But this truth carries another: if suffering proves we exist, then the response to it defines what kind of existence we create. We cannot erase suffering, but we can decide whether suffering isolates us further or whether it becomes the bond that ties us closer. Each act of recognition, each moment when one person says to another, "I see your pain," is a strike against despair. No single act ends suffering for all, but each one proves that humanity does not have to mean loneliness forever. The Absolute, then, is not some far-off entity to worship, but the deep connection we are already inside of. If you feel unseen, know this: every second of your existence alters reality, even if invisibly. You breathe, and oxygen becomes carbon dioxide. You speak, and vibrations ripple air. You feel, and your neurons spark with energy that reshapes your brain's pathways. These are small things, but they are also cosmic things. In a universe made of patterns and connections, nothing is wasted, and no being is without consequence. To say you do not matter is to deny the structure of reality itself. Still, the mind pushes back, but no one cares. That is the wound that hurts most, the thought that makes people collapse into hopelessness. And it is not wrong. Many times, people will not care. Families will fail you, partners will betray you, friends will turn away, and strangers will pass by without looking. This is not something to deny. It is part of truth. But it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is that care exists unevenly, unpredictably, and sometimes only briefly, but when it does exist, it is real, and it changes the world. History itself turns on small acts of care: one person feeding another, one person refusing to walk away, one person choosing to value a life that someone else ignored. Without these sparks, humanity would have collapsed long ago. If loneliness is the condition of consciousness, then recognition is the antidote, not complete, not permanent, but powerful enough to pull someone back from the edge. And when we recognize each other's suffering honestly, without sugarcoating, without pretending it is all for some higher good, we create something extraordinary. We create solidarity. Solidarity says, your suffering does not vanish, but you will not endure it alone. That is the beginning of a world with less suffering. Not a world without it, such a world may not exist, but a world where fewer people drown in silence. This perspective matters for humanity because it shifts the focus. We often think of power as the ability to control, to dominate, to be free from suffering. But true power, the kind that can remake societies, comes from the refusal to abandon each other to despair. Power is when people who feel worthless come together and discover that in each other's eyes, they are valuable. That kind of recognition can topple empires, build movements, and save lives. And it begins in the smallest places, in listening, in witnessing, in saying, you matter because you exist. When people feel unseen, they become dangerous, to themselves, and sometimes to others. When people feel valued, they can endure even unimaginable pain with dignity. History is full of both, revolutions born from recognition, atrocities born from isolation. Which future humanity builds depends on how deeply we take this truth into ourselves. Suffering is inevitable, but abandonment is not. Loneliness is universal, but solidarity is possible. The absolute is the ground of connection that makes both suffering and solidarity possible. To be alive, then, is not only to suffer, it is to carry the chance to reduce suffering for another. That is where value lies. That is where humanity must turn if it is to become something more than it is now. Carrying the chance to reduce suffering for another is not a trivial task. It is not a polite gesture or an optional virtue. It is a responsibility that comes with the very fact of being conscious, of being able to perceive, to act, to speak, and to care. Every time we look away, every time we pretend another's pain does not exist, we participate in the quiet expansion of cruelty. The world is heavy, and indifference makes it heavier. To act, to notice, to speak, to acknowledge, is to push back against the darkness. And even if that push is small, even if it seems insignificant in the vast machinery of suffering, it matters because suffering is cumulative and recognition is rare. One act of genuine care can ripple farther than any decree, any law, any policy. Consider how easily humans become blind to suffering. We are conditioned to categorize, to sort experiences into what is acceptable to witness and what is better ignored. Pain that is distant, unfamiliar, or uncomfortable is treated as if it does not exist. But those who suffer are not less real for being hidden. Their reality is as sharp and as true as any loud tragedy, any headline-grabbing catastrophe. And yet, without recognition, their pain risks being swallowed into oblivion. Loneliness is amplified by invisibility, and suffering grows heavier when no one acknowledges its presence. This is why the insistence on seeing, on valuing, on acknowledging, is not sentimental, it is existential. It is the difference between a world that crushes its members and a world that, imperfectly but deliberately, carries them forward. Every human being has a universe inside them. That universe is full of light and shadow, of memory, desire, and fear. To deny its existence is to deny the most fundamental fact of reality. Consciousness is irreplaceable. One cannot substitute another's experience for your own. No amount of logic, statistics, or policy can fill the unique combination of perceptions and experiences that define a single life. And this uniqueness is precisely why recognition matters. It is why the words "I see you" are so heavy, so necessary. Not because they erase pain, but because they make the person carrying it visible in a world that constantly seeks to ignore them. The absolute is intertwined with this visibility. To exist as a conscious being in the absolute is to leave a trace, however imperceptible, on reality itself. Pain, joy, fear, love, despair, all of these create ripples in the fabric of existence. Even if no human witnesses them, even if they leave no record in history, they have weight. They matter in a cosmic sense because consciousness itself matters. The absolute, in this sense, is not a distant judge but the ground upon which the consequences of awareness, of your being, are registered. That awareness carries responsibility. The knowledge that suffering is part of consciousness is also the knowledge that recognition, connection, and care are part of the same reality. To be alive is to be implicated in both the pain and the alleviation of others' pain. And yet, the alleviation of suffering is never simple. Some suffering is beyond repair. Some wounds leave scars that never fade. Some traumas are unseen and unknowable, even by those who wish to help. But acknowledging this complexity does not excuse inaction. It does not grant permission to ignore what is within our reach. Even the smallest recognition, a touch, a glance, a shared word, can prevent suffering from becoming crushing isolation. These small acts create networks of support, webs of value that reinforce the humanity of everyone involved. They are the practical manifestation of the philosophical truth: every conscious being carries weight in the world. This is why feeling valued is so vital. To feel valued is not the same as being praised or rewarded. It is not contingent on achievement, beauty, or skill. Valuing someone is acknowledging their existence as a thread in the web of reality, as a presence that matters beyond any utilitarian measure. A person who feels valued can endure suffering because they understand, in the deepest sense, that their existence shapes the world. They can survive invisibility because recognition, even when rare, has affirmed their place in the network of being. Conversely, when recognition is denied, suffering intensifies. Loneliness becomes crushing. Pain is amplified. The absence of acknowledgement is a form of cruelty that is subtle but profound, slow but destructive. History teaches this lesson again and again. Systems that fail to recognize the humanity of all their members, slavery, oppression, caste hierarchies, colonization, create suffering that reverberates for generations. Systems that acknowledge and protect human dignity reduce suffering, not perfectly, not completely, but measurably. The difference is never abstract, it is lived. It is the difference between lives spent in silence and invisibility and lives where people can endure, act, and even love despite the inevitability of pain. Recognition, solidarity, and valuing each life are not abstract ideals. They are practical shields against the relentless pressures of existence. To build a world with less suffering, humanity must internalize this truth. We cannot prevent every injury, every loss, every moment of despair. We cannot make pain vanish, and we cannot erase the memory of those who suffer unnoticed. But we can decide, collectively and individually, to refuse the ease of indifference. We can choose to see one another clearly, to honor existence itself as sacred not in a mystical sense, but in the hard, tangible sense that each life carries weight. This is the practical application of understanding the absolute. Existence is connected, and the suffering of one is inseparable from the suffering of all. To ignore one is to weaken the fabric of reality, to deny the consequence of consciousness. Every act of acknowledgement, every gesture of solidarity, every refusal to look away, builds a structure of resilience. It is a structure that cannot be quantified easily, but whose effects are undeniable. Children who feel seen survive trauma. Communities that recognize their marginalized members endure crises more effectively. Societies that refuse to normalize invisibility prevent cycles of harm from taking root. Recognition and care do not eliminate suffering, but they make it bearable, and they prevent its cumulative weight from collapsing individuals and communities alike. To be alive, then, is both a privilege and a responsibility. It is a privilege because consciousness is rare, fragile, and impossible to replicate. It is a responsibility because awareness creates obligations that are not optional. The absolute witnesses, but it is through human action that suffering is either mitigated or allowed to expand. Each human being carries the ability to shape the weight of existence for others, and therefore to shape the world itself. This is the ethical imperative born from consciousness: to see, to value, to act, to carry where we can. Understanding suffering in this way forces a reconsideration of human systems, families, communities, institutions, governments, and cultures. Most structures are designed around efficiency, productivity, or control, rarely around the weight of individual existence. They reward those who comply, those who perform, those who fit neatly into pre-existing categories, and often punish or ignore those who do not. This structural neglect intensifies suffering, making invisibility a systemic problem, not just a personal one. People become casualties not only of circumstance but of social frameworks that fail to recognize them. The tragedy is not merely that individuals suffer, but that society often normalizes the invisibility of that suffering. And this normalization corrodes the moral foundation of entire cultures, leaving cruelty in place of compassion. Yet the potential for change is always present, because recognition, valuing, and care are not limited resources. They are renewable, generative, and contagious. One acknowledgement sparks another. One act of empathy creates a ripple that passes through countless lives. When a person recognizes the suffering of another, they validate existence itself, and that validation feeds the Absolute in its practical form, the living, breathing human network that holds consciousness together. This is why the fight against suffering is both personal and collective. It is personal because each individual has the capacity to see, acknowledge, and act. It is collective because the impact of recognition compounds, creating a society in which fewer people are left invisible, fewer lives are unvalued. Humans are resilient, but resilience without recognition is fragile. A person may endure immense suffering alone, but that endurance carries a hidden cost: alienation, mistrust, and the erosion of empathy. Communities that deny recognition create not only individual pain but generational cycles of trauma. Pain that is unseen tends to replicate itself, manifesting in subtle cruelty, broken relationships, and systems that perpetuate harm. This is why moral and ethical responsibility cannot be abstract. It must be tangible, visible, and actionable. To honor life is not enough. It must be done in ways that prevent further erosion of human dignity. Recognition does not erase the difficulty of living, but it rebalances the scales slightly. A child who is consistently acknowledged, even amid suffering, retains the possibility of hope. An adult who is seen for their quiet endurance gains a fragile but potent shield against despair. Recognition affirms that suffering is not meaningless, not because pain itself carries a cosmic lesson, but because the person enduring it matters. Their life matters. Their pain matters. And the acknowledgement of their reality reverberates outward, shaping the interactions of others, subtly reweaving the moral and emotional fabric of society. The Absolute functions as a backdrop for this reality. It is the field in which all consciousness exists, the medium through which existence registers itself. Awareness creates a mark on reality, even if that mark is imperceptible to others. To live consciously, to endure suffering, and to act in recognition of others' pain are all ways of interacting with the Absolute, not by commanding it, but by participating in its ongoing manifestation. Every acknowledgement of existence, every act of solidarity, strengthens the network of being. Conversely, every act of indifference weakens it, subtly eroding the capacity for collective resilience. To live fully is to accept this duality. Suffering is inevitable, and yet recognition is potent. Loneliness is unavoidable, and yet solidarity is possible. Pain exists, and yet action can mitigate its reach. There is no contradiction here, only a clarity that human life is neither frivolous nor accidental. Consciousness is rare and precious precisely because it is fragile and burdened with both awareness and responsibility. In this light, acts of recognition are profound. They are the primary way we honor life itself. The practical implications of this understanding are enormous. In families, it demands that each member be seen, heard, and validated, even when the experience is uncomfortable or inconvenient. In communities, it requires attention to the marginalized, the overlooked, and the silent. In institutions, it necessitates policies that protect, rather than ignore, the vulnerable, recognizing that dignity cannot be separated from survival. In societies, it calls for cultural norms that place moral weight on acknowledgement, on care, and on the refusal to normalize invisibility. Without such structures, suffering becomes amplified, both in individual lives and across generations. This is why feeling valued is essential, not as an abstract principle, but as a lived reality. Every human being is a node in the network of consciousness. Each life has a unique perspective, a unique presence, a unique weight. When we acknowledge and honor that, we strengthen the connections that allow societies to function without cruelty dominating. When we fail to acknowledge that, we weaken the very fabric of collective human existence, allowing indifference, invisibility, and suffering to propagate unchecked. Understanding suffering and recognition in this way reframes power. Power is often measured in wealth, influence, or the ability to command. But the truest form of power lies in the ability to affect the experience of others, particularly those who are most vulnerable. The capacity to see someone, to acknowledge them, to value their existence, is a power that cannot be destroyed. It is distributed equally across all people, because everyone can recognize and honor another. And when this form of power is exercised widely, it reshapes societies more profoundly than any law or policy. It shifts culture, changes relationships, and transforms the lived experience of countless individuals. To be human is to be implicated in the suffering and well-being of others. Loneliness, pain, and invisibility are universal, but they are not immutable. Recognition, solidarity, and care are equally universal in potential, and they can be cultivated. The Absolute is the framework that makes this potential meaningful. It is the field in which each life exists, the backdrop against which consciousness registers itself, and the medium through which recognition resonates. To participate consciously in this field is to accept responsibility, to notice, to acknowledge, to act. Every act of recognition, no matter how small, is an affirmation that the person enduring suffering exists in a meaningful way. Every refusal to look away is a strike against the tide of cruelty and indifference. Every moment spent acknowledging the hidden struggles of others reinforces the moral and emotional architecture that allows humanity to endure. These acts do not eliminate pain, but they prevent it from becoming total, irreversible, and isolating. They are, in a sense, the practical embodiment of the Absolute in everyday life. Ultimately, the path to less suffering lies in embracing this understanding with rigor and honesty. It is not about naive optimism. It is not about pretending pain is a gift or a lesson. It is about confronting the harsh reality of loneliness, of unseen suffering, and of human vulnerability, and responding with recognition, care, and the unwavering acknowledgement that every life has weight. It is about seeing the invisible, hearing the unheard, and affirming that even when the world looks away, each individual matters. Consciousness itself is a responsibility. The awareness that one exists carries with it the opportunity and obligation to act. To see suffering is not optional. To ignore it is a choice that deepens the cruelty of the world. To recognize it is to participate in the repair of the human network, to reinforce the bonds that allow life to continue without crushing those who are most vulnerable. Recognition is not an abstract virtue, it is the practical act that preserves humanity in the face of inevitability. The inevitability of pain, the inevitability of loss, the inevitability of death. To embrace this perspective is to accept a profound ethical and existential truth. We are connected, each of us, in ways we can neither fully see nor control. Our lives touch one another in countless subtle ways. Suffering, when recognized, becomes a bridge. Suffering, when ignored, becomes a chasm. The Absolute is the backdrop that gives weight to this dynamic. It is the witness, the ground, and the consequence. And human action is the instrument through which suffering can be mitigated, invisibility reduced, and dignity affirmed. In the end, to be alive is to endure, to witness, and to recognize. Suffering is real. Loneliness is inevitable. But recognition is possible. Connection is possible. Solidarity is possible. The Absolute does not demand that pain be erased. It does not grant a world without hardship. What it does allow is the moral and existential truth that every act of recognition matters, that every gesture of care shifts the network of being, and that no life is insignificant simply because it is hidden or wounded. A world with less suffering is not a utopia. It is a world in which fewer people are invisible, in which care is given even when inconvenient, in which the weight of existence is acknowledged rather than ignored. It is a world in which loneliness is mitigated by recognition, and where the sheer act of being seen carries transformative power. Each of us participates in the creation of such a world, not through grand gestures alone, but through the accumulation of small, honest, deliberate acts of recognition. To live fully, then, is to accept suffering as part of consciousness, to acknowledge the Absolute as the backdrop of existence, and to act in recognition of others as an ethical imperative. It is to understand that even when no one else cares, your awareness, your acknowledgement, and your presence carry weight. It is to see the unseen, hear the unheard, and value the hidden. And it is to insist with unwavering honesty that every human being, however silent, however wounded, matters. This is not sentiment. This is survival. This is the architecture of a humane society. This is the truth of consciousness made practical. Pain exists, but so does recognition. Loneliness is inevitable, but so is solidarity. Suffering is real, but so is the power to see it, to honor it, and to prevent it from crushing those who endure it in silence. And in this recognition lies hope, not false, naive, or abstract, but hard, tangible human hope, the hope that every life, however hidden, can be acknowledged, the hope that suffering can be softened by being seen, the hope that humanity can build a world in which the weight of existence is not ignored, and the absolute registers every life as it deserves, real, important, and irreplaceable.